Hey, it's Professor Wham, and I've gotten so many questions about these drone sightings that are being reported in New Jersey that I decided, like many others in the Perisphere, to render some thoughts about it all and just to remind people about certain things. Shouldn't take too long. So let me be clear. On the most basic level, I don't have any more actual idea about what's going on than anyone else. But given the level of rumor and scuttlebutt that has been flying, you know, I guess that's why people ask me. They think I'm an expert about things in the sky. I'm not really, but yeah, I'm more of an expert about what people report, not what is actually up there. By the way, the particular graphic for this was its own entertaining thing. I was looking for something that had to do with drones, and when I just simply searched on drones, both on Google and in this one service that I subscribe to, where I get some of my images from, it gave me this bizarre combination of like wasp drones, wasp and bee drones, insects, and various types of mechanical drones, including, like AI pictures of androids, which I thought was bizarre, plus of these kinds of drones here that you see. This is a type of drone that is being apparently used in agriculture right now. And of course, that reminded me of the episodes in Picard, Star Trek Picard, where they show these very large drones helping him do his vineyard at Chateau Picard. Anyway, it was entertaining. So I just picked one of these AI generated agricultural drones for this. So mostly all I'm going to really do is review my observations, my thoughts, provide some context, mostly to remind folks that reports like this are not one-offs. First, I would remind listeners that this latest cluster of drone sightings is not a new thing. Back in 2019 and 2020, there was a very large flap of similar drone reports in Colorado and the neighboring states of Nebraska and Wyoming. Those were never entirely explained by anyone to anyone's satisfaction. The sightings and the crafts or slash lights were remarkably similar to many things that are being reported in New Jersey and beyond. And, they're equally as mysterious. What's interesting about the lights that showed up in 2019 and 2020 is that they were seen hovering over also some sensitive missile silos, and sometimes in fairly large groups for long periods of time, some quite close to the ground over privately owned fields. Now, there were no local laws in those cases that were broken, but many of the drones also did not show any FAA regulatory lights if they showed up at night. And oftentimes they had no lighting at all. I mean, and sometimes they had interesting or bizarre lighting, just like what we've seen in New Jersey. Now, what was curious about these drone overflights is that many times they appeared to concentrate their attention on completely empty land with no obvious observables. In other words, they'd just be over these huge empty pastures that exist in the West. And why? I mean, there's like nothing there. Anyway, now the current drone flap does seem to be concentrating right now on more populated areas, at least relative to the far west. But what isn't often being talked about in the mass media surrounding these is that there are concurrent flaps that are going on right now in the Great Lakes region, particularly in Michigan. There's been sort of an ongoing set of phases of things being seen in Michigan. I'll provide a link that gives some examples of that. There have also been some interesting sightings that have been seen off the west coast of Florida and Washington, quite striking, and these have actually been seen by pilots. And there's actually been some in Indiana. So those sightings are going on at about the same time that these New Jersey things are going on. So it's hard to know, essentially. There apparently have been some other similar sightings seen in some other countries. There have been reports in South Korea that are kind of odd. There have been reports in Japan that are kind of odd. So who knows if they're all connected? They're just all happening at approximately the same time, in the same time period. So basically, what's going on in New Jersey isn't the only thing that's happening. Furthermore, there have actually been sightings of similar objects or lights occurring at a lower level, not at sort of the flap level that they are now, but at a lower level throughout southern New York for several months. And in fact, I actually saw one of these myself on my way to work in September, and I'll recount that in a little bit. Now, basically, for reports such as these to reach the level of media attention that they have, there must be lots of sightings, at least, and apparently, from what I understand, at least some of them are pretty strange. It's important to understand that folks on the East Coast see things in the sky all the time. We have tons of airports, both regional airports, national and international airports, as well as small local airports. So things are always in the sky. And there's a lot of police monitoring that goes on, particularly in urban areas, and they do use drones for that. So we've become accustomed to lots of things in the sky. So if things look unusual, they probably are. They're not what people are used to seeing. So as many other online investigators have done, I've dug a bit into the reports, and I agree with many other commentators that it looks like lots of different things are going on. There are some obvious misidentifications. There are some regular drones. There are clearly probably some commercial or private drone users that are using this opportunity to flip their stuff up in the air and just kind of see what they can do. However, there are some pretty strange reports as well. Some drones are way too big for commercial drones and are much more, or appear to be much more like the larger military drones, such as the Global Hawk or the MQ Reaper, which can carry large payloads up to 5,000 pounds. They have wingspans of almost 15 feet. They can travel between up to their ceiling is between 50,000 and 65,000 feet, and they can be deployed for about 24 hours at a time. So there are some military drones that fit the size and some of the behavior profiles of some of what is being seen. There is a rumor that some versions of the above drones may also have amphibious capabilities as well, which is important to consider when thinking about reports of these craft entering and exiting the water off the New Jersey coast. So there have been some reports of these things, of objects hovering above the water, entering the water, and coming out of the water. Now, the IDF, and I'm assuming all of you will know who the IDF is, the IDF has been using devices like this to eliminate targets trying to escape from neutralized settlements in one of the current conflicts. I'll let you guess which one. We know this because rank-and-file military participants have been trophy posting such activities on TikTok. Note how I have to say this euphemistically in order to counter the censors. Now, I'm not sure why such devices would be buzzing around New Jersey exactly, except that they are often used as surveillance in other places, and they don't always have to display the FAA lights at nighttime. I mean, when I've seen some of these, footage of some of these objects, some of them do actually display FAA lighting, but many of them don't. And what a lot of the public doesn't know is that according to federal law, if there is some kind of exercise that those sorts of drones are engaged in, they don't have to display FAA lighting. Now, in fact, they don't have to display any lighting at all unless they are in a fly zone where they might get hit by commercial aircraft. Now, so that does beg the question of why some of them would be displaying bizarre lighting. So, yeah, it's like there's still a lot of questions about all this kind of stuff. Now, one terrifying explanation that has been floated may have to do with a persistent rumor which has popped up from time to time. And this rumor has popped up again, namely that one of the alleged missing nuclear weapons or suitcase bombs from the Ukraine is in the process of being smuggled onto American soil. Since 1997, and especially since the freedom of Ukraine from Russia was declared, there have been rumors of anywhere from 100 to 250. The latest count on this is 80, so maybe they have found some of them, of such suitcase bombs that were said to have gone missing, have been floated as to, like, we don't know where they are. When nuclear weapons were removed from the Ukraine, there was supposed to be an inventory of these that were done. And apparently, according to one report of one general who was in charge, I'll put the link up to this as well, of one general who was in charge of this inventory, he originally said that between 100 and 200 of these suitcase bombs were missing, and that has later been updated to 80 are missing. Now, the Russian government has always strongly denied the existence of these bombs. But, given the current state of Russian-Ukrainian-U.S. relations, I don't know. It's hard to know. The fact, and to remind you, that the general overseeing Russia's chemical, biological, and nuclear forces, Igor Kirillov, was killed on December 17th, 2024. In fact, the very morning, ironically, that I started writing this text, only ratchets up the tension surrounding this possibility even more, particularly since he was clearly killed in a targeted explosion by Ukraine in Moscow, and they've claimed responsibility for it. The drones that I mentioned above can be outfitted in such a way so as to sniff for chemical, nuclear, and biological weapons. And if that's what's going on, it's probable that the DoD wouldn't tell the public what they're doing at all. And to be clear, they may either be looking for something that they've heard about, or they may be simply practicing, testing the capability of these particular machines to be able to do that. So there could be a military reason why these kinds of drones are operating in New Jersey, and it is a pretty scary one. Now, as I did mention, some sightings are clearly of misidentified commercial drones and planes. Others seem to be of these military drones. But there are some sightings as well that most resemble classic light-bearing UFOs or AUPs that do seem historically to piggyback on these kinds of clusters, which is weird. And again, I will put up a link to some footage that seems to indicate that some of the lights that are being seen are just, they're not drones. I don't know what they are, but they're not drones. And they're clearly not, just simple celestial objects. So what I mean is that there are plenty of night lights that are zipping around, changing shape and color, especially into the green-blue spectrum, and then disappearing. Some of these lights or objects are being seen during the day as well. And most of us have probably seen at least some footage or stills of these reports. Now, some investigators who have already commented on this, paranormal investigators, have pointed out that it is not uncommon for aerial phenomena to occur immediately before or during great social changes. This is a generally true observation, although I am also reminded that many times such aerial displays, if they do occur before such changes, generally and often accompany tragic events like massive earthquakes, the fall of empires, military invasions, etc. But I'm not going to guess or speculate about this latest flap. I mean, we're all nervous wrecks right now, right? However, I will recount a couple of my own experiences with odd drones, both a recent sighting of my own and a dream I had almost 20 years ago, which has recently sort of come back to haunt my memory. So back in September, on my morning commute, in a line of cars crawling south on 9W, which winds down the west side of the Hudson, I saw a strange moving light in the sky to my left over the river. It seemed to be at about the same altitude as the Mid-Hudson Bridge, at least at first, and it was very bright. The sun was only just peeking above the ridge to the east, but the light I was seeing was not a reflection since it was on the back side of the object. So it was on the side of the object that should have been in the dark, but it was a very bright glowing light. When I first saw it, I assumed it was some kind of a drone because of its proximity to the bridge. Maybe it was monitoring traffic either on the bridge itself or on the river, since the Hudson is also used for moving products and freight, and it gets busy around Poughkeepsie, and that's where the Mid-Hudson Bridge is located. And I also thought maybe it's looking for the body of a jumper, since we've had a substantial increase of those unhappy people in the last 3 years. Anyway, those were my thoughts as I kept my eye on it while driving. It hovered. The object hovered for quite a while, sort of moving side to side. All of a sudden, it shot up in the air quite suddenly. At that point, I realized I was much closer to it, and I realized that the object was much larger than it had originally appeared. It was bigger than the traffic drones I had seen local police using. So I rolled down my window to see if I could hear anything, because it was large and I was much closer to it, but I could hear nothing. There was not that familiar buzz of a drone. So I continued to watch. There were times it seemed to suddenly plunge towards the river. It was definitely moving around a lot. And I wondered if everybody else in the line of cars was watching this thing. At one point, as it was hovering at a very high level, it had sort of shot up into the air, I had to glance away from it briefly to check the traffic in front of me. And when I glanced back, it was a couple seconds later, it was gone. I mean, completely gone. There was no trace of it. I guess it could have gone down and never come back up, but it was gone. No bright light moving away, no dark object shooting in the space, just gone. Now, I still tend to think it was a drone of some kind, although why it was a large one and had such a big light connected to it, I have no idea. It was certainly not an FAA light. It was certainly not the kind of lighting that I see on traffic drones, because I've seen those. So I have no idea what it was. It was very interesting. About 20 years ago then, I don't remember exactly when, but it was during our military actions in Iraq in the early 2000s. I awoke from a nightmare in which I was helping others escape large drones that were trying to hunt people down. In the dream, I had found these large tunnels which provided places to hide because the drones couldn't operate in the confined spaces. They couldn't receive the transmissions necessary to operate them. These machines weren't called drones in the dream. We just knew that they were trying to eliminate us. And the dream went on for a while, and I became sort of in the dream responsible for helping people to get into the tunnels. Now, given the events of the last year, as I've heard of certain populations trying to actually escape from similar machines into tunnels or underground enclosures, this dream has taken on a surreal level of relevance, particularly if large military drones are currently being used for whatever reason to survey members of the American public. Finally, one of the more interesting drone rabbit holes that some have gone down involves a supposed Hopi or Navajo prophecy. I've seen it listed either way, although the only indigenous people I've heard discussing it were Navajo or Dene. And this prophecy is said to foretell the coming of many flying objects from the sky after the ascension of a political figure who was associated with a red hat. Now, obviously, many interpreters are seeing the red hat as a reference to the hat worn by diehard believers in T-Rump. The prophecy, at least in the version I've heard, goes on to say that the ascension of the red hat figure to power will be followed by an invasion of flying machines and ships. The entities in the flying ships will then divide the people of the earth into several groups. The ones in charge who have despoiled the earth will be publicly unalived by Chop Chop. The group immediately under them who did their wishes will be forced to clean up the earth by the toil of their own hands. Most others will be punished or supported depending on their past behavior and intentions towards the planet. In any case, this is supposed to happen immediately before the commencement of the earth changes, and many people will suffer and may be left behind. Now, interestingly, this story is mirrored in a far more sinister way by the Project Bluebeam conspiracy theory, which is one of the QAnon theories, which maintains that the global elites will use advanced drone and holographic technology to fake an alien invasion, which will then enable them to take over and subjugate the rest of the world. Whatever the reason for the drones, seeing anything unusual in the skies is usually a good reason to pay attention, although I'm tending toward the notion that the DoD is either testing something or looking for something. And like I said, in either case, they are authorized to ignore FAA directives. Combine this with misidentification, some private dronesters taking advantage of the situation, and probably some genuinely odd things. It's very common for all of this to happen at once, and you've got a flap. But don't ask me what I believe. I don't know. I just sit and watch. I keep my own belief in abeyance. I pay attention only to my own inner directives when it comes to my opinion. But my advice to you is don't limit yourself to the bubbles in which you live. Something probably is coming, but then that's always true.